Hey, this is Dr. Corey Glenn with Blue Sky Bio, and I'm going to be showing in this video how to go about doing a wax up using the new Blue Sky Bio digital crown and bridge module. Now, this is still in beta form, so depending on when you watch this video, there could be some significant changes, but I did want to put this out to go ahead and get people going so they can kind of see the overall way this would work and go ahead and start using it right now to be able to do your own wax ups in-house entirely for free. This is a really big thing to be able to do that could generate a lot of cosmetic cases, full mouth rehab cases, and really just expedite the overall time involved with treatment. And so all that I've done at this point is I've opened up a window in Blue Sky Bio, I've gone to File, Import STLs, and I've just pulled in my existing preoperative casts for the upper and the lower. Now you're going to notice that these are slightly apart, and so one of the things that I did is I knew that this patient needed to have their vertical dimension opened. And so we did a centric bite using a leaf gauge at the intended vertical dimension. Now, currently within Blue Sky Plan, there's not a virtual articulator that's going to allow you to hinge models up and down. And so if you want to be able to have them in the right occlusal position, you need to take your bite at that intended position. Now, if you're restoring them in maximum intercuspation, no big deal. That's not going to play a big part. But if you are doing a substantial change, you need to change the VDO, please do that step first because that's going to make everything be much more accurate. With that done, the only other step that you would need to do, and mine is already done, but if you looked at your models and they are not oriented properly to the skull down here in the bottom left, you need to do that first. Okay, so you need to orient your models. You could do that by just clicking adjust position manually, lining it up to however it needs to be, and then once that's done, you'll be ready to go ahead. Now, another quick word on the positioning. I like to use this grid, and you can see here that I've used this grid to align the vertical component right through the midline, or actually you would want to do it through where you would like to have the midline. So that's going to help you with setting your teeth. And I've positioned the horizontal component where I want the incisal edge, and even with the occlusal plane. There's a lot of different ways you can do this that I've done in other videos. You can parallel that horizontal component to the hip plane. You can just do it aesthetically based on pictures and eyeballing it, but I would say that's an important step as well. Not absolutely necessary, but I do find it helpful. So with that done, what I'm going to do is go up here to the top right and change out of normal mode, which is the surgical guide mode. That's where you have to import and export models from. That's where you have to orient your models. But with that done, now you would think we would go to crown and bridge first. I'm actually not going to do that. I'm going to go to denture module first. And the reason for going to denture module first is that the denture module has a unique attribute that allows you to pull in a lot of teeth all at once and very quickly scale them. That function is not yet in the crown and bridge software, and so I would suggest starting here, import your chain of teeth that you're going to be doing the digital wax up with. And then once you have those roughly scaled to size and approximately positioned, then we'll change over to crown and bridge. Okay, so with this done, we're in the crown and bridge, or I'm sorry, the denture module. I'm going to come and hit the plus tooth, and we can choose which library of teeth that we want to use. There's several here available. Let's in this case use the Mitchhurst Flat Anatomy Library. And what I'm going to do for this video is just do the maxillary arch. Okay, so I'm going to select all the maxillary teeth here. I don't want second molars here, so I'm actually going to eliminate the second molar. So I'm holding down Control and then left clicking to turn that off. So with these teeth selected now, I'm going to say add these selected teeth as a chain, and you'll see that there is a little icon here of a tooth. Hold down Shift on your keyboard and just single click on the maxillary arch, and that will drop in the entire tooth chain. Okay, so this is a feature that I came to the denture module for, is being able to manipulate this entire tooth chain quickly and efficiently. And so what I'm going to do is first of all get these up here in approximately the right position. And I could hide at this moment the mandibular cast just so I can see a little bit better. So go ahead and pull the entire tooth chain down. This is where it's useful to go ahead and have that plane done as well, because now I can see the overall alignment and see that my posteriors need to come up because I want everything resting on that plane. All right, so done that. Left to right, it needs to come down a little bit to the right to even things out. And with that done, that is looking pretty close to what I want it to be. All right. Now the next step, I can pull this over, align the midlines, and now I can start judging the scale of the teeth. So as I look at this, the canines are obviously significantly farther back, and so what I'm going to want to do is go up here to the denture panel, and while you have your move entire tooth chain button turned on, you've got the ability now to scale the teeth. I'm going to scale these down slightly. Pull back over and align the midline again, and slide them again up where they're lying on top of one another, where I can judge the overall scaling of the teeth. Now the canine is much more appropriately overlaying the existing canine. The centrals are maybe a tiny bit too narrow, but that's okay. We just want to get the overall scaling pretty close. All right, so with that done, once again, I've set this where I wanted my incisal edge to be on the plane. So there, we've done that. My midline should be passing right through the vertical component. And again, these are not steps that you absolutely had to do with that plane, but you can see why it does make life a little bit easier once you've done that. So I've got midline on the horizontal or vertical component. And the one other thing that we can do in denture module that I find useful is utilize this tooth chain. Okay, so let's go now and hit show and hide the tooth chain. And here we can keep the relative position of the teeth appropriate to one another, but I can lock these teeth starting with the centrals since I appropriately position them. And do you see how these teeth are set in a much narrower arch than what the patient's are? So by locking at this, I can now hinge off of the distal of that central and pull the lateral out where it appropriately overlays the lateral incisor of the pre-existing. I can now lock that one and do the same with the canine. And then just continue my way back, positioning the teeth over the arch. Because here she's edentulous, so these are more of a, not so much a wax up on teeth, but more of a, where we might be positioning implants or something like that. So we just want to get an ideal setup. And with that change right there, now you can see that the maxillary molar and the second premolar is overlaying the arch, and we can repeat the process now on the other side. So expand the arch. That looks good. Canine is pretty close, so we can lock it as well. Premolar needs to come back slightly, and then the first or the second premolar and the molar need to come back. So now you see that we've really quickly got the entire arch of teeth in an approximate position, and that's going to make life a lot easier once we now switch over to the crown and bridge module. Just one more look to verify the occlusal plane. It looks like everything is resting nicely on the occlusal plane. I think I can pull this premolar up ever so slightly by locking the tooth on either side. And looking at the other side, we could lock that and bring that molar down ever so slightly. All right, so that's all that we need to do in the denture module. Again, hopefully we'll have this incorporated into the crown and bridge module eventually, but right now you've got to do a little jumping back and forth. So with that done, now I can switch to crown and bridge, and we can begin doing the legitimate wax up at this point. Okay, so the first thing that I like to do is I like to go ahead and turn on the transparency of these teeth. Now I'm going to go a couple of teeth at a time. I'm not going to try to do everything all at once. And so with that done now, I can go and make some more big picture type movements. If you were to hit on manipulate model, you'll have the ability to have the widget turn on to any surface that you hover over. And that's what I want to do is now see if I need to stretch the tooth in any given dimension. If I was to look at the patient's opposing, there's quite a gap right there in between the occlusion, and we're going to close that gap halfway with the lowers if I was going to do the entire wax up, and halfway with the uppers to make them meet. So here, what I'm going to do, turn on the transparency of that so I can see through it. Now let's hover on the central incisor, and if you grab this dot at the end, you'll be able to see that you can essentially stretch the tooth in a more lingual direction. All right, that looks good. Let's do the same with this one by about the same amount. A little bit more. And remember also that I mentioned that each of the centrals was a bit too narrow, so this is the point at which I can stretch that. So my goal with this wax up is that I want it to be a completely additive wax up with no preoperative tooth shining through. And so I'm going to stretch this so that I more or less swallow up the existing tooth. Same thing here. I want to keep symmetry going. And that looks nice. If you were to turn on your grid, you can see relative position using these spacing things, and looks like we're pretty symmetrical. Okay, I'm not completely swallowing that up yet, but I've gotten the approximate position. I do also want to pull the facial out a little bit. So we stretched in the lingual. I also want to stretch that a bit in the facial direction. And that looks good. With that done, lock that, lock that. Sometimes that widget, if you got too many teeth that are active, it can kind of jump around on you. So here, same thing with the lateral. Stretch the lateral, and I think it could actually be stretched inward a little bit in that dimension. Okay. So pretty much at about the contact point, come over here. Once again to right about the contact point. This is what I meant about it jumping. Sometimes it's hard to grab that if you've not locked the other teeth. All right. And I'm always keeping an eye on the symmetry between these. I want everything to match up pretty closely. And looking again, I think this central is a bit too narrow. Stretch it a bit more. And same here. So you can start to see this wax up taking shape now. Buccal lingual dimension, the facial aspect looks good. I want to stretch the lingual aspect of it. Again, closing a bit of the interocclusal space between the anterior teeth. Now I'm going over contoured, but that's actually okay right now. We'll be able to clean that up a bit later. So you see here how I'm going well down onto the gingiva. No problem. We'll fix that here as we go. Let's lock these teeth up again. Locking the laterals now that we've taken care of them. And, oops, Control Z if you accidentally grab a tooth that you don't mean to. Lock it so I don't accidentally do that again. I'm going to pull the canine to ideal contacts with the lateral. And then it needs to also be stretched distally. right about there. Let's pull its lingual dimensions in some. Actually, you know what? Since this is not entirely centered on that, I'm going to wait on stretching it towards the lingual. Let's now hover over this tooth. There we go. If you need to tweak alignments, you can. If you feel like the rotation is not quite what you want. That needs to be pulled slightly facial. Same with this one. All right, so I have a rough positioning of the canine, and right now I'm going to go ahead and lock those. And let's just continue working our way back. Now, what I'm going to do, that patient has lower molars, and so since I want to set them up in an ideal occlusion, I'm going to visualize having my mesial buccal cusp in more or less the buccal groove of this. And this really looks like it's pretty close to being there. Pull it down ever so slightly. This tooth I'm going to upright just a hair. And same here. So this is the beauty of digital, is that you can play around with this quite a bit until you just have things exactly where you want them. So that needs to be in the mesial buccal, the mesial buccal cusp needs to be in the buccal groove of the lower first molar. And with that done, we'll be able to scale the premolars in between that to appropriately fill the space between them. Okay, so I've set my molar positioning. I'm going to turn the lower model off again, and let's position these premolars in between. Now you're going to notice that in some areas I'm creating some overlap, and that's fine. I don't want drastic overlaps, but something like that, that's actually not going to be a big deal. That's going to be perfectly fine to work with. Same thing on that molar. I like its contact the way it is right here. Maybe pull it in just a tiny bit. There we go. And then the mesial half of this tooth needs to come on back. So I've made that first premolar a bit skinnier. If you can't see one of your widgets, just make it transparent so that you can grab that. There we go. So we have that side of the arch pretty much done. And now we can come over here. I'm looking at this canine, and I think I kind of want to rotate it back just a bit. Right in there. There we go. Remember, the first molar is set, so I'm going to lock it. And now we just need to position the premolars within the space. So I can rotate it as needed. So think of this as your big picture movements, and then we'll get into more of the fine detail movements. Great. Okay, so we have the big picture movements done, and this overall is starting to take quite a bit of shape. Now, if you're just really after a very quick proposal, maybe something you could flash in the patient's mouth with a putty transfer and just give them a rough idea, this would be perfectly fine. You could export now all of these teeth and this model together, and then solidify it and print this, and that could be now your model to do the putty transfer off of. And this would be a huge head start that maybe then you could dial in the mouth. So know that you can do that. I'm going to go a little bit further and try to make a bit more of a detailed wax up here. All right, that looks good. And with that done now, let's begin going ahead and doing more of our fine tuning of the wax up. So now I can go to the tooth editing panel. I can turn off manipulate model, which again, I'm calling that like the big picture movements. And now we can begin doing more of the fine details. Now, because you have to choose in this menu which tooth you want to alter, having them all white to me is a little bit difficult to see. So one thing I'm going to do, you don't have to do this, but I'm going to just go ahead and change the color on all these and just get a different color tooth for each one so that they're easier to spot in the drop-down menus. You'll see what I mean here in just a moment. There we go. And then the last one being white, that distinguishes it. All right, so what I want to do is I want to start from the central incisors and I want to begin fine tuning each one of these teeth. All right, so in the tooth editing panel, now if I'm trying to find what tooth I want to work on, I can look at this and see, okay, so the green tooth is the left maxillary central incisor, and I can grab that really quickly. So left maxillary central incisor, and what I want to do is go ahead and use you've got all these tools. You've got smooth tools, you've got global geometry. Just to give you a preview of what all these tools are, unlock this. Global geometry, that is this. And so you've got this bounding box that you can now stretch a tooth in any particular direction. Control Z that. If I wanted to pull that back slightly, I could. I don't like using that tool as much. I like to use the local geometry tool. And with the local geometry tool, I can select a pretty broad brush size. And what I'm trying to do is pull this back. You know, I stretched the tooth earlier because I wanted to add bulk up here, but down here at the gingival margin, I can't overextend onto the gingiva, and so I'm going to grab this lower half of the tooth and pull it back to right there at the gingival margin. I'm going to scale it down by just holding shift and using the scroll ball. That changes your tool size where you can use the slider. With that done, I'm going to do the same thing in this area. And I find you typically want to use a broader brush size than you might typically think, just because that is going to make your overall anatomy not get, you know, messed up. You're going to keep overall shapes a little bit better. And then right here, pull that back. Now the whole lingual is pretty much appropriately positioned to the gingival margin, and I can look up on the facial now. So stretch this a little bit towards there to close the black triangles. So much faster than using wax. I used to do a lot of wax ups for classmates and some in my own practice even, and it is just so time consuming. And this is something I would have killed for back then. All right, that looks good. That tooth is done. With it done, let's lock it. Now let's look and grab the pink tooth. All right, so in the drop down menu, pink tooth, unlock it. And now do the exact same process here. You can also use the smooth tool. Sometimes if you're pretty close to start with, the smoothing tool can be a useful tool to be able to do this. Let's see, why am I not finding it? Oh, it's up here. That's the central incisor that I wanted. All right, so smoothing tool, again, broad brush size, and you can see I can just, if I'm close, I'll just smooth that back to conform to the gingival margin. All right. You could use add and remove. So if I wanted to add a little bit right there. And with the add and remove and the smooth tools, you've got a strength that you can use. You can either do the strength slider, or if you hold down the control button and use your scroll ball, that is the strength. So if you like hotkeys, you can do that. Again, I find the most efficient tool to be the local deform because I can make big movements very efficiently. Now that I'm close, I'll smooth it. And then I'm going to add. And that tooth is done. Now, I'm not taking into account a lot about the lower because I know the lower is going to get waxed up as well. But if I wanted to turn that on and evaluate my occlusion now, I can look at this and again, using all the same tools, be able to affect those teeth appropriately. So like with the local geometry tool, I could grab this lingual portion in this area where it looks a little deficient, pull that outward without altering the aesthetics of up there on the gingival margin. Create a bit of a cingulum here. Let's jump back and do that on the left central incisor as well. Once I've got the margins done, you can turn off that transparency and it helps you to see a little bit better your contours. All right, I like both of those. They're done. And my thoughts always on a wax up is that it gets me in the ballpark. I do not assume that it's going to be perfect occlusion, perfect excursions, and all of that. This gets me in the ballpark, and then I'm going to dial in the centric bite with a leaf gauge, progressively removing different leaves until I have them equilibrated into centric and MI being coincident. And then I will work on my excursive movements using the patient as the articulator. I think that's the best way to do this. And you know, once you've got that, if you've dialed it in the mouth and everything is now comfortable, I think that's a good time to take a new intraoral scan or impression and digitize that so that now it's not only a wax up, but it's more of a functional wax up. Okay, this tooth is next. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and just time lapse the remainder of this because I think you get the general idea now. And then I'll, when I finish this, I'll begin talking again and tell you how I would use this from that point on. Okay, and here you see the finalized wax up. Everything has been adapted down to the gingival margins. The pontics we've just kind of put in there as placeholders to guide us where we would like to do the implants and to be able to judge aesthetically when this is tried into the patient's mouth. You can check occlusion if you need to. If you've got any areas like right here, this molar is definitely impinging into the opposing. You can now double check that. You do have the ability to turn on the color heat map and to evaluate, how close one surface is to another. So if I wanted to evaluate the closeness of the lower model to the left maxillary first molar, I could turn that on. Actually, I've done the wrong side there. This is the right maxillary first molar. Okay, now you can see here what the contact scheme looks like, and we could lower that down a bit if we needed to. Let's go to right maxillary first molar and manipulate model, and I'm gonna just take the entire occlusal down just a hair. Okay, and if we wanted to also, we could use the local geometry. I like local geometry because it gives you the ability to change areas but without washing out the occlusion, like is often the tendency if you're using add, remove, smooth tools like that. Here we preserve the anatomy and everything continues to have that nice crisp appearance that we would like. Okay, so the only other area that I see here that we need to adjust is this maxillary right second premolar, and that one I think we can get rid of with just a simple smooth. There we go. All right, so this is the completed wax up. Really what I want to do is if I want this to be an entire wax up, I just need to export all this together. Okay, so let's go to File, Export Data. And what we want to export is that maxillary model and then all of these teeth. Let's export it. Let's call this Wax Up Demo. And now if you were to open that file, you can now see that this is the completed wax up, and it's all been saved as one STL. Whatever you have checked on when you export it, it's going to basically combine into a single STL. So now this is our single master wax up model, and we obviously can't print this because this is not a watertight model at this point, but we could very simply do that by going to plane cut, and we could plane cut up here at the top. Now that's a model. We could hollow it, and then if you really wanted to save on your resin, you could plane cut again, and this time cut below the level of the hollow that you did, maybe something like that. All right, so now you can 3D print this model. It's going to take minimal resin to be able to do this, and once it's printed, you can now do a putty transfer on this for being able to transfer that into the patient's mouth, just like you would if you'd gotten a conventional lab wax up. And again, I don't consider this the end-all be-all. This is an initial proposal. It gets me in the ballpark, and then we can dial this thing in the mouth. You could also now use this for purposes of planning out implants if this was a full mouth rehab and you were going to do implants in these sites. So lots and lots of really nice options here that you can do with this wax up. So I hope you found that useful, and I hope you can start doing some of your own wax ups within Blue Sky Plan.